Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
We're watching Fanboy.
A fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
Dot, I assume Tom.
Names for me? Start.
Bryce Johnson.
Bryce Johnson, doctor?
Mireya Mayor.
Mareya, okay. Sir?
Russell Acord. Ronny LeBlanc.
Well, we are here talking at WonderCon about Expedition Bigfoot. This is the third season, Discovery Plus Discovery Channel. The reaction has been great to get 3 seasons out of all of this. The most important question I can honestly think of asking at this point is, how do we separate the notion of cryptozoology and the pseudoscience with the actual science of the study of primates, or primordial beings?
Let's take it back to the discovery that I made with a colleague in Madagascar only a little over 10 years ago. That was something in cryptozoology, this brand new species, the world's smallest primate in Madagascar that had never been described. And I wouldn't say almost overnight, but because there was a lot of trekking and research that went into proving that it was a brand new species to science. But once that gets into the scientific world, it is almost overnight that it's then accepted and out of cryptozoology. So they're related in the sense that both require an extensive amount of research and investigation. And once you push that needle forward and you're able to prove the existence of a new species, suddenly it goes into the realm of science.
Yeah, I mean, if it happened for the giant squid, it could happen for Bigfoot.
And what does that do with the reality of things? I mean, last year, it was either last year or end of 2020, the federal government all of a sudden decides to go, oh, by the way, there's aliens in the middle of this pandemic, and you guys are arguing politics, which got ignored by quite a few people, to now the possibility, you found this one creature, but the possibility of discovering Bigfoot or the wild man in Russia or the Yeti or whatever other versions of this across the planet. What happens when it, like the alien thing, if it does get ignored, how do we get that back into mainstream ideology?
I think what you're saying is there seems to be a paradigm shift. 20 years ago, when people said the word UFO, there usually came a giggle factor that accompanied that. That's not the case today, because we now know that the government is interested in studying the UFO UAP phenomenon. In fact, the Secretary of Defense started its own UAP task force. So now when people talk about UFOs, the taboo nature of it seems to have swayed. People are taking the subject a little bit more seriously. And, when you talk about Bigfoot, it sort of has that same giggle factor taboo nature. But when you're talking to scientists and primatologists like Dr. Jane Goodall, who says, hey, there's a precedence for these things being real. I'm speaking to witnesses, indigenous hunters, who are coming back and telling me, they're seeing something out on these hunts that's large, hairy, upright, walking, and has no tail. In other words, they're describing Bigfoot. So when you get people like that talking about this subject, hopefully, people will start to take it a little bit more seriously.
The term skeptic has had a bit of a negative connotation in it, and it's not like a healthy skepticism of there's a possibility of excitement. It's more this pulled back and like, it could be, but I don't want to believe it or give it credence. How do we give it back to that notion of this general excitement of the unknown? Same way if we go back, 55, 60 years ago, traveling to space and wanting to discover that final frontier.
Yeah, I mean, you need skepticism. You need, like I described before, it's like that yin and yang. It's part of the whole process, and I think you're going to have groups of people that are just never going to believe it, and you have other ones that are kind of on the edge. And if we can just help by bringing more awareness to the subject and kind of shedding a little bit more of a light on this, I think it's just going to be a matter of time, because I feel, UFOs and what Bryce brought up, Bigfoot's right behind that. Mm-hmm. Like, it's the next thing that people are wondering if it's real, if it exists. And there's a lot of interesting correlations between the two. Different military bases like Edwards Air Force Base, they witnessed these tall, bipedal, hairy creatures coming onto the base. And they were told by their superior officer not to engage, but to just observe through starlight scopes. And so they're aware of these things, and I think there's been a big kind of truth embargo, kind of where I think it's coming, and I think that we're helping to bring that out, and other researchers are coming forward and sharing their stories, even if they're strange and sound like science fiction.
Right. There was the wildfires up in Washington State, and that could have had an effect on things, whether they went into hiding or deeper hiding, or their habitat was destroyed. Let's say we do find Bigfoot. Where does it go in between scientific research, where there's the fear of the unknown and we want to dissect everything to see how it works, to preservation of the creature and possibly, I think mating them would be the wrong ideology behind this, but
A breeding
a breeding program. Yes, thank you. Finding the balance between the desire for dissection to see how what their interiors are like versus preserving their existence.
Science has come, I think, has progressed since the days of just going out, shooting something down, bringing it back to museums, as a specimen to dissect and learn about. I think that is something that pioneering explorers did for a very long time, and something that the scientific community now really sort of frowns upon, now that we understand that these animals are not limitless in numbers, and especially when you're dealing with a creature that you know nothing about. If it's out there, we don't know what the numbers are, so we don't know if we are basically capturing like the last of its kind, right? And that was the case when we made this discovery in Madagascar. Scientific community, of course, did expect, in a traditional way, that type specimen, that body, a male and a female, in fact, to keep in a museum drawer, right? To have as evidence, but also to learn more about. We did not do that. In fact, we collected a male and a female that lives still in Madagascar. When they die of natural causes, they will be brought back into a museum for more study. But I think that there's a progression in how we look at these things, and that conservation now does play actually a really important factor when these discoveries are made, which, by the way, are happening all the time. So when you talk about skepticism, there needs to be, and I certainly have a very healthy dose of it, but the open-minded approach is that we are making new discoveries all the time.
And Russell, you are a survivalist. I believe you have a military background as well.
Correct.
When we have science meets skepticism meets military training, that it all plays together in this, and we have season 3 now, Discovery Plus and Discovery Channel, the Travel Channel. I'm sorry. The connection of all of them coming together, the credence of all of this means so much to society. It's not, I hate to use the phrase tinfoil hat people, but it gives it a reality to it, and then you take us into the habitats of possible creatures, whether it's bears or whether it's the wolves or whatever we find out there in the Northwest. What does that mean to you in the search if you do stumble upon, say, a nest or a cave or whatever we'd presume they live in?
It's all about having evidence. There's so many stories out there where people have not come forward yet that have some amazing things to say. And they keep that to themselves because, like with the UFOs that people are finally now openly talking about, where if we were able to prove scientifically and without question that Bigfoot exists, a lot of these stories would start resurfacing, and we'd hear a lot more about it. And maybe the preservation of the land they would start literally roping off areas that we couldn't get into so that the land stayed the same. But as a double-edged sword, if you know something exists and it's in the Olympic Peninsula, you're going to have the people that will ignore those boundaries and still dig in and become intrusive. So it's got to be a balance. Government knows a lot about a lot of things that they don't share with us, and finally they're now starting to openly speak about UFOs. I don't know what they know about Bigfoot, but if they know or have any information on that, maybe they're keeping it to themselves for a reason.
And before I let you go, and you guys get to enjoy lunch and take a break before the panel this afternoon, communication. Let's say we discover it. How do we make an attempt at communicating with a primate? We understand how to communicate with chimpanzees. We understand how to communicate with gorillas and monkeys, and various other primates. But as humans, we can barely communicate with each other without getting on each other's nerves. How are we going to do this with a supposed 7-foot, 8-foot creature?
When you talk about communicating with chimpanzees and gorillas, those are all captive, really, situations. I think that if you've ever looked at a gorilla, say at a zoo, and looked at its eyes, you are essentially communicating because of the close relationship. There's thought behind the gorilla's eyes, like they can read your body language, and a lot of the ways in which animals do in fact communicate is through body language. So by remaining, calm, somewhat even submissive, like when you're in presence of something like a lot bigger than you, if it's territorial, I mean, understanding the nature of what you're looking at, there's a lot of things that you can communicate without, in our traditional sense, like talking, you can in fact make that very clear.
Well, I greatly appreciate your time here at WonderCon in Anaheim, California. It's a beautiful day. Enjoy your afternoon, and I hope everybody's looking forward to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.